I met Reuben actually at the Commons free breakfast making toasties a couple months ago now, and we got chatting, and I was so inspired by his story of starting SportsGrad. And in the space of 9 weeks, Reuben was actually stood down from his job at Cricket Australia and started renting a beach house down the Great Ocean Road in Lorne, and launched a business off the back of a YouTube channel. And then also launched a podcast which reached #1 on the careers chart in Australia. And this is how the SportsGrad community started. And my understanding is that, the SportsGrad community helps grads land jobs in sport and helps sporting companies hire great talent. And Reuben and his co-founder, Ryan, who's also a CC member, have been working very hard on the SportsGrad community over 5 years. And they've also raised investment, and they're both working full-time in this, what I call a CAS, a community as a service. So you have SaaS businesses like software as a service, and this is a CAS. So really, you've built a community from scratch, and that's exactly what some of our members here have been trying to do. It's like not only managing big growing communities, but also starting, from day zero. So I'm really excited to throw over to you, Reuben, and please add some color to your introduction. And I'm pumped to see what you've got. So please, everyone, join me in a big round of applause.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Paz. Can you guys see that okay? Can you hear me okay?
Stunning.
Awesome. Excellent. I still remember those toasties. They were delicious, but the conversation was fantastic too. So highlight was by far meeting you, Paz. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. Firstly, I just wanted to say congrats to you as well. I think taking on the Community Collective full-time is absolutely an awesome endeavor. The fact that so many people are part of this community, I think you've got 200 people a part of it now. There's over 30 people on this call today, which is awesome for a webinar. Shows that, this is a much needed thing. So it's really cool to see that you're giving it your all, and happy birthday, 1 year of the Community Collective too. So pleasure to be sharing my story on your birthday. So thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Reuben. You're very kind.
As Paz said, my name is Reuben. I am the co-founder of SportsGrad. I'm lucky that Ryan has joined me as well. If I slip up or miss any parts of the story, that's why Ryan's here to fill in the blanks as well. I'm sure there's more information and questions at the end that Ryan will be able to answer for you guys too. So very lucky to be supported by Ryan, who I met at work. But SportsGrad is a community that aims to connect students and graduates to jobs in the sports industry and help them land those jobs once they get there as well, through a bunch of resources that help them network, help them apply for jobs, help them interview and do all those sorts of good things. But in terms of how we built the community, none of it was on purpose. So I just kind of want to add a caveat to this morning that I'm not an expert on this. I didn't set out to build a community from the very beginning. It all just kind of happened. And that was one of the things that kind of became apparent to me when I first joined the Community Collective, when they asked, how did you get into community job? And almost everybody said, I fell into it. Well, we fell into it too. So what I'm sharing with you today is by no means the Bible of community building. This is just our experience and kind of the key pillars that have been a part of our growth. So what I'm going to show you today is our journey. And our journey to kind of building community has kind of taken on these 5 pillars. It started with having empathy for our core customer before taking on accountability to try and solve their problems, building an audience around it, aligning people around a mission, and then telling the stories of ourselves and the people who are part of our community to really level it up. And you might see there that this timeline is not to scale. The empathy and accountability part is extremely prolonged, which is why there is this is pointless indicator in the middle of it, because we were very close to giving up. But I want to cast your mind back to September 2015. Now, 7 years ago, I was lying on my bed at my parents' house crying because I just lost my job that I'd held for the previous 7 years. And this was a very casual job that I had been working at a local bakery, and somehow I'd done the impossible. I've got myself fired from a local bakery. And if you want to find out how I did that, you can ask me afterwards. But what it did for me was it made me desperate. At the time, I was in my first year of a new sport management degree. I just dropped out from a marketing degree. I got halfway through that and thought, oh, I don't really like this, which is kind of ironic because now almost 100% of my job is marketing. So I could really use that degree. But at the time, I dropped out of uni. I'd been fired from an impossible job and I was taking on a new career. And I kind of said to myself, I need to make something of this. I can't, fail again. I don't want to be an embarrassment. I don't want my parents to kind of criticize what career choices I'm making. I have to make something of this. And so that experience of losing my job and dropping out of uni made me desperate. And for the next 2 years, this fear of failure kind of drove me to volunteer, to do unpaid internships, to join university societies, to network with people in sport. Even when it extremely pushed my comfort zone, to the point where I was calling a bloke one day who worked in the Melbourne Football Club, and I had his number dialed into my phone, and it took me 25 minutes of pacing around my backyard doing these ones to build up the courage to press call. And I was in my head, I was going just press call now, put your finger down on the button and call him. And I couldn't do it for 25 minutes because in my head as a student, I was like, this guy's too important. He's got better things to be doing. What business would he have chatting with me? But for the last part of my degree, these experiences became pivotal to what we talk about now. And over those last 2 years, I kind of grinded and picked up opportunity after opportunity and started networking, meeting lots of people, to the point where one day I got into the car heading to cricket training. My friend Cam picked me up. And I was so excited to tell him about this internship I just got with the Hawthorn Football Club. And I told him about the role and everything I'd be doing. And he said to me, Reuben, is this one actually going to pay you? And I said, no, but hopefully one day somebody will. And at the end of that year, after doing all these different internships, after networking furiously, I was very lucky enough to land my dream job at Cricket Australia and started on the first Monday after my final exam. And the reason I'm sharing this experience with you is that having empathy for our core customer has been the number one thing that has helped us grow our community. Firstly, it's kind of given us enough energy to be able to solve the problem for our community. We are so dedicated to solving this problem because we have lived it. And secondly, it's actually it's helped us understand what problems need to be solved. The second part of our journey to building community was taking on accountability. So in the later part of my time at university, I was learning a lot from the people in sport that I'd be going out and networking with. But I noticed that my peers at uni, they weren't going out and having the same conversations. And so I thought, here I am learning all these great insights from people working in sport. If I could just transfer that knowledge onto other people, then a lot of people would be able to learn a lot more about how to get a job in sport. So that kind of prompted me to create a YouTube channel called SportsGrad. And after going out and recording the first one, I thought, let's just see if I'm onto something. So I edited it, sent a message to my group chat and said, hey, what do you think of this? And the first response I got was a snoring emoji. I thought, oh, great. Well, that was an excellent exercise. I'm glad I asked those people. But I continued on and I went out and continued to film another interview and another interview, and it became a raging success. It took, for the next 3 years, I grew it up to a massive subscriber base of 30 YouTube subscribers. That's 30. And so, so along the way of getting really slow traction, but also trying to kind of work at Cricket Australia, a lot of my time was kind of divided between doing those two things, but the YouTube channel was lacking a lot of attention. However, I would get a lot of really nice messages from people who would say, hey, Reuben, I loved your interview with Joel Freem from Football Australia. I had no idea what the team manager of the Socceroos actually did in his day-to-day job. And that was enough to kind of keep me going to go out and do another interview. And so the other thing that I did during this time too was start to build up accountability through teaching. And so these questions that I was going out to ask people in the industry started coming to me. And these students would come to me and say, hey, Reuben, how did you get your job in sport? What did you do to convince Cricket Australia that you are worthy of this position? And so I started coaching them on how I would apply for jobs, how I would write my resume, how I would write my cover letter, how I would interview, how I would use LinkedIn, how I would network, all these different things, and run that in a spiffy little workshop after hours at the Deakin University Library. And so after a while, I started to build up. I started to take on accountability for being the person who could help these people find jobs in sport by going out, leveraging the stories of people who are working in the sports industry, and also trying to teach the lessons I'd learned to the people who were trying to break in. So once I had empathy for the core customer, once I had taken on accountability by trying to solve their problems and building proof of work around the people who I was helping, I then had trust that this was something that I could do. So the next key thing in building a community became building an audience. And so at the start of 2020, Cricket Australia stood down 80% of staff due to the pandemic. And so we got stood down from work, and I thought, this is 9 weeks that I'm never going to get again. This is an incredibly rare opportunity. There's JobKeeper that's keeping me afloat. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have dependents. I'm in a very kind of flexible position to be able to take on something like this. And so what I did was I moved my life down to the beach. I started renting a beach house in Lorne and got to work on throwing everything into SportsGrad and seeing how I could turn the empathy that I had for students trying to get into sport management and the accountability that I'd taken on to try and solve their problem to build an audience and start to scale that. And halfway through that time, I was going out and chatting with a lot of students. I would jump on Zoom every day to try and listen to them and understand what were their core concerns. And that really started to help me kind of build up this bank of problems that I could start to solve. And then after I'd kind of done this sort of research and development phase, I then thought, well, the YouTube channel hasn't worked with just me. How can I make this better? And that became the perfect time to call up my mate Ryan and say, hey, Ryan, do you want to do a podcast with me? And at the time, nothing was going on at work. Ryan was lying on his bed. It was about 7 p.m. on a Tuesday night. And he goes, yeah, why not? And so that's how the SportsGrad podcast began. And we started recording podcasts. We started building up this bank of interviews and thinking about what are we going to talk about and who's it going to be for. Anyway, as the 9-week standout period at Cricket Australia continued to progress, there were murmurs in the news and internally about redundancies, that not everybody would be brought back on the 1st of July once Cricket Australia had the money to pay people again. And a week before Ryan and I were getting ready to launch a podcast about how to get jobs in sport, I got a call from my manager who said, Reuben, I'm sorry to say your role has been made redundant. I was like, Steph, this is really bad timing. My whole thing that I'm about to do is about getting jobs, not losing jobs. Can you please just make someone else redundant? So little side lesson in all this is leverage sympathy. If something bad happens to you, people want to help. And sure enough, when I lost my job, enough people felt sorry for me that we became the #1 podcaster for 3 days. So if anything bad happens to you, just leverage it. Just absolutely milk it, because who knows, you might become the #1 careers podcast in Australia. So at the time, there's a little article from the Geelong Advertiser. They kind of caught on that a guy in Lorne was working for cricket, lost his job, started a podcast. And they asked me for a few different photos to put in the newspaper, and I sent them 4 options. And of course, they went for the side lying photo on the beach. So once we had empathy, once we'd taken on accountability, and once we'd started to build up an audience, the next best thing for us was building community around a mission, getting everyone really aligned around a mission. So it took SportsGrad roughly 3 years to become an overnight success. And by this point, we'd thought, all right, finally the idea is validated. Let's go out and really try to push it. And we were going out and interviewing people all over the world who are working in sport, from sponsorship managers at the Chicago Bulls to product managers at the NBA to the CEOs of national bodies in Australia, and asking them, how do you do what you do and how do you get to where you are today? And people were loving it. One day we got a message from a woman in Argentina who said, Reuben, I've literally stayed up all night listening to your podcast. And I thought, oh my God, there are people in Argentina who can't sleep because of us. And so we realized that, all right, we're onto something here. Let's really try and build around this. We're getting a lot of messages around from people in the industry who said, I wish this was around when I was going through uni. And also they were saying, if there's any way that we can give back, let me know. I'd love to help. I think the sports industry has this really nice culture of paying it forward because it is so reliant on networks and so difficult to break into, that everyone has had a helping hand. So everybody's willing to pay it forward. And so once we'd kind of, started to kick off the podcast and started to gain traction, I was desperate to make it my full-time job. And so I knew that because we were so niche, we were going to have to come up with a really reliable business model. So I thought, let's go subscription revenue. So that's when we started to work on building the community. This is the end of 2020 that the first version of the community started to come together. And at the time, it was just for students. Inside, we would give them resources on how to get jobs in sport. We would connect them to other students and help them network. And what was really interesting was that people would come in, they would finish their degree, they'd get a job, and then they'd stick around. They wouldn't leave. They wouldn't unsubscribe. They wouldn't quit or cancel and go find time somewhere else. They would stick around. And in the chat section of our community, they would start offering advice to the next person and start helping other members of the community. And one day, our very first member, who's Nathan Peroni, who you can see, we did a podcast with him, which made it to the lectures of Deakin University. He met a bloke called Lachlan Croft at one of our speed networking nights. And at the time, Nathan's working for the AFL, and he said to Lachlan, hey, there's a role that's come up in the community support team at the AFL, which is where he was working at the time. And he said, if you're interested, I've been through the application process. If you want to apply, I'm happy to help you because I reckon you'd be a good fit for the team. And then sure enough, Lachlan Croft, who never thought working in sport was possible, was working at the AFL 3 weeks later. And so I think one of the proudest things that Ryan, and one of the things I'm most proud of that Ryan and I have created, is this really lovely culture of paying it forward and giving it back and helping other people get jobs in sport. You don't necessarily have to be a CEO with 30 years of experience to help other people and pass it down. You can be a graduate who's 1 week out of university who knows just a little bit more than the person who hasn't quite got a job yet. So in Feb last year, we then started to, we then released a second version of the membership. We thought, community's crap. We need to change it. We need to flip everything up, change the platform, change a few other features. And in the process of doing that, I put out a message on LinkedIn just to say, hey, here's our new offering. And LinkedIn had been going really well for us at this point in time. You know, we'd get some posts that would get as many as 500 likes. But this one was just, I thought, new product, new version of the membership. Surely some people are excited about it. We got about 12 likes. But later that day, a bloke called Shannon Gove sent me a message and said, hey, Reuben, really like the new offering of your community. Do you want to come to the tennis tonight? I'd love to chat about it. And I thought, sure, why not? So went along to the tennis, met this bloke, Shannon. Secretly, I knew a lot about Shannon. He'd been working in the industry for the last decade, building up this company called Event Workforce Group, whereby their purpose was to help students find meaningful placements in sport. And so they would provide all the casual work to events like the Australian Open, like the Australian Grand Prix. They now do all the footy record seller shifts as well. So they were providing really meaningful work to sport management students in the industry. And this guy saw what we were doing and thought, hey, let's have a chat. So I ended up in his office one day, and he then asked me something that I'd never thought I'd be asked in my entire life. And that was, what would it look like if we were to invest in you? And so now this kind of scrounging little community that wasn't really doing much, but was just kind of hanging on to this guiding light of, let's just help people. Let's just continue to help people, had attracted a group of investors who had been helping people for the last 10 years. And so I think the number one, again, to reiterate the point, the number one thing that we've done over our journey, I think, has been really true to our mission of helping other people get sport, because not only has it helped attract members, not has it helped, CEOs want to give up their time to come on our podcast, but it's also attracted the right kind of investors. And so earlier this year in March, we finally got to announce that we're working with Spark Event Group to try and make the trajectory from the sports industry, from university into the sports industry, a lot more seamless and clearer for people. And none of this, I think, would have happened without having a really clear mission of and purpose of what we're trying to achieve. So now we'd gone from being this like YouTube channel with 30 subscribers to a seed funded startup. Along the way, we'd become the number one careers podcast on iTunes. Deakin University also jumped on as a major sponsor. We've now got 330 members inside our organization who we love to bits. We've now got over 35 organizations working from the sports industry, and we've been able to help over 200 people land jobs in sport. And so that's a part that really gets us going, really gets us up out of bed. Just last week, one of our members, his name's Lewis Fitter. He sent us a message way back in 2020. He said, "Hey, Reuben, I often get asked, what are you going to do with your career? But then I think about what opportunities are in sport, and I've got no idea what I want to do with my career. It's so broad. What can I do? What jobs actually exist?" So we created a podcast for Lewis to answer what jobs exist in sport. 2 years down the track, he's gone on to become one of our early adopters of our membership. He's gone on to take on various different internships and casual jobs with AFL clubs and stadiums around Australia and other different event groups. And now he texted me last week just saying, "Hey, Reuben, I got offered a job at TLA Worldwide. Do you reckon I should take it?" I said to him, "Lewis, that's one of the biggest sport marketing agencies in Australia. Absolutely should take it." He goes, "Okay, cool. Do you know where their office is?" I was like, "Yeah, they're in Cremorne." He's like, "Oh, sweet. Look forward to Friday drinks soon." So now Lewis has finally made the jump into a full-time job in sport, and these members are becoming an everyday part of our lives, which we absolutely love. Which leads me to my last point, which has arguably been the most important element of our journey to date, and that is storytelling. I'm not sure if many of you have read the book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, but it talks about how the difference between humans and other animals is stories, how people connect over stories. Religions are built around stories, and wars are won around stories, and people look for meaning around stories. And it's how people connect. And the essence of community is connection. And so you can kind of tie storytelling to community building. And so that's one thing that we've tried to do the entire way through. Not only have we tried to tell our story, but we've tried to tell the stories of our members. This here is Michael Long. Michael Long is a massive Sydney Sixers fan. One day, he went along to one of the games to watch Steve Smith belt Sixers out of the SCG, and he saw someone wearing a Sydney Sixers uniform from the staff. And he went up to them and said, "Hey, I'm a massive fan. I'm studying commerce and marketing. Like, how do I get a job with you guys?" And they put him in touch with the right person, and he literally networked his way at a cricket game to getting a job at the Sydney Sixers, which I think is just remarkable. This here is Sarah Pretty. You might recognize she's taking the same selfie photo outside Cricket Australia, which is really lovely to see. Sarah was from Adelaide. She messaged me last year and she said, "Hey, Reuben, I'm working in the hotel industry at the moment, but not really enjoying it. I don't really know how I got here, but I kind of like sports and I've seen your stuff. Do you have any advice for me?" So we started chatting casually. And then in February this year, she became a member. A month later, she took on a casual social media job with Netball Australia, covering the Super Netball League. And then a month after that, she took on a casual role with Cricket Australia in the community cricket support team. So now she's gone from working at a hotel to working at two of the biggest national sporting bodies within a matter of months. And then this year is Nathan Peroni. So Nathan is our first ever member, and I'm incredibly proud of this guy. He backed us from the very beginning. He kind of saw our podcast and thought, I love what you guys are doing. I can see the value in it immediately. I'm going to become a member straight away. And he was working at a local gym at the time, and he's an incredibly loyal person. So when an opportunity came up at the AFL, he called me and said, hey, Reuben, I'm not really sure what to do. The gym really needs me. Like, I don't know who they're going to, I don't know how they're going to backfill my position. I feel like I owe my boss a lot. I'm like, Nathan, you're not going to grow if you don't put yourself out there. And sure enough, he applied for the AFL position, got it. He worked there for 8 months and helped other people like Lachlan start their career at places like the AFL. And then Nathan, the entire time he's been within our community, all he's ever talked about is sponsorship and football, being the world game, soccer. He's a massive Liverpool fan. And so his dream job is to work in sponsorship in football. And 3 months ago, a job came up at Western United. It was a sponsorship coordinator. And he threw his hat in the ring and absolutely nailed the application because he put himself through so much volunteering, so many internships, so much networking, which allowed him to get the right experience to be a no-brainer for this position. And 3 months into his job working in sponsorship in football, he enjoyed the success of Western United winning the A-League Premiership over the weekend. And I went up to him and said, Nathan, you absolutely deserve this experience. What you've done over the last couple of years is incredible. And I was watching from the halfway line, and at the end of the game, all these people started piling, all the staff members started piling behind the goals in front of the Western United supporters. And I could see Nathan down there, and he's chucking his arms up in the air. He's trying to get the crowd up and about. I'm like, this is a guy who's just walked out of uni. He's 3 months into his first job, and he's pumping up the crowd, just absolutely lapping it up. And I didn't watch another second of the game. I just kept watching Nathan. I was so happy for him and what he was going through. And so these stories are what keeps us going, and it's what inspires other members of our community and what ties the whole thing together. And so to bring it back to our timeline, we've started off kind of living our problem. We've had extreme issues trying to get into the sports industry. We've been incredibly tired and worn out and know how tough it is to get in. But we have taken on the challenge and that accountability to be the ones who have tried to solve it. We've then tried to scale that by building an audience around ourselves through creating free content through the podcast. But the podcast almost didn't happen. And then along the way, we've had this mission of trying to help other people get jobs in sport, which has allowed other people to gravitate towards us and be a part of what we're trying to achieve. And now that's kind of what we're really doing next, just opening the community up to others. It's not Reuben and Ryan's community anymore. It's the SportsGrad community. It belongs to everybody. It's up to everyone to kind of help each other. We're really trying to step out and just kind of allow the mission to take over. And along the whole way, there's been this element of storytelling, which I've got at the end because it's allowed us to really scale up and grow. But I think storytelling has just been a massive part of every part of it. And I know like to get to this point has been extremely tough, but I think one thing that I was very mindful of the whole way through was, if you lose your job at a bakery, so what? You've got to get somewhere one day. No story was ever created without a bit of conflict, without a bit of a dip. So I kind of said to myself, Reuben, don't worry, the story just gets better. And then when I moved to Lawn, or when I was thinking about moving to Lawn, I was like, oh, Reuben, you've just been put down on JobKeeper. You're not earning enough to pay double what your rent is in a coastal town. But I thought, you know what, if I can build this from a coastal town, then the story just gets better. And then 9 weeks later, when I lost my job, and I thought, oh God, my dream job has been taken away from me. I thought, that's okay, because the story just gets better. And so I think for anyone who's out there trying to build a community or trying to build their own story, and they do encounter these hurdles, that's a good thing. That's what creates a story. Your story gets better when you do have hurdles along the way. That is all from me. That's a bit about my journey and how we've got to where we are and how the community's kind of built over time. If you want to continue to follow our journey, I'd encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn and connect with us there. I have written out our SportsGrad story from podcast to startup, so you can read about all the little details in between that have gone on. But thank you very much for listening. I hope you've learned something.